In 2002, the United States Army had a weapon that worked. It had passed its tests, it had funding, it had a production line ready to go, and then the Pentagon canceled it after spending what would eventually total over $14 billion. No scandal, no catastrophic failure, no congressional outrage. Just a phone call from the Secretary of Defense, and one of the most advanced artillery systems ever designed was quietly put in a drawer. The XM-2001 Crusader was supposed to be the future of American firepower. So why did it die before it ever fired a single shot in combat? The answer says more about how America fights wars than it does about the weapon itself. To understand the Crusader, you have to go back to the Cold War. Through the 1970s and 80s, US Army planners were obsessed with one nightmare scenario: Soviet tank columns punching through the Fulda Gap in West Germany. NATO's strategy, air-land battle, relied on mobile, fast-moving ground forces backed by massive artillery firepower. The problem was that American self-propelled howitzers at the time, primarily the M109 Paladin, were aging, and the Soviets were fielding newer, faster, more capable artillery of their own. So in the mid-1980s, the Army launched a program to build a replacement. Something faster, something more powerful, something that could survive on a modern battlefield and still deliver devastating fire on demand. The program went through several names and redesigns over the years. By the 1990s, it had become the XM-2001 Crusader, a joint project between United Defense and the Army, with development centered at their facility in York, Pennsylvania. The concept was ambitious: a fully automated, self-propelled 155mm howitzer that could operate in any climate, reload without a crew member stepping outside the vehicle, and sustain a higher rate of fire than anything in the current US arsenal. This wasn't just an upgrade to the Paladin, it was a generational leap. The Army wanted a system that would dominate the battlefield well into the 21st century, and for a while, it looked like they might actually build it. The Crusader was, by almost any technical measure, extraordinary. At its core was a 155mm cannon capable of firing at a sustained rate of 10 to 12 rounds per minute, more than twice the Paladin's rate at the time. An automated ammunition handling system meant the crew never had to manually load shells. Less exposure, less fatigue, less error. The gun itself had a range of roughly 40 kilometers with extended range munitions. For context, that's the distance from one end of Washington, D.C. to well beyond its outer suburbs. The vehicle was designed to work alongside a dedicated resupply vehicle, the XM-2002, which would dock directly with the Crusader in the field and transfer ammunition in minutes without the crew dismounting. The two vehicles operated as a team, and it was heavily armored. Unlike the relatively thin-skinned Paladin, the Crusader was designed to survive counter-battery fire and light anti-armor threats on a high-intensity battlefield. One of the more impressive features was its ability to perform what engineers called multiple-round simultaneous impact, firing several shells at different trajectories so that all of them arrive at the same target at the same time. Against enemy artillery or command posts, that's a devastating capability. But here's where the first problem started. All of that capability came at a cost, literally. The Crusader weighed approximately 60 tons in its final configuration. That's heavier than an Abrams main battle tank. Getting it anywhere quickly required significant airlift assets. A C-17 could carry one. Maybe. For a war against Soviet armor in Europe, that weight was acceptable. For the kinds of conflicts the US was starting to fight in the 1990s, it was becoming a serious liability. The Crusader's troubles didn't start with Rumsfeld. They started much earlier, in the procurement process itself. Through the 1990s, the program experienced repeated cost overruns and redesigns. The original weight target was around 40 tons. By the time the design matured, it had ballooned to 60. Congress grew frustrated. The Army kept defending the program, United Defense kept building. Then 9/11 happened, and everything changed when Donald Rumsfeld took over as Secretary of Defense in January 2001. He arrived with a clear agenda: transform the military. His vision, often called defense transformation, prioritized speed, precision, and deployability over raw firepower and heavy armor. In Rumsfeld's framework, the future of warfare was lighter, faster, and more agile. The Crusader was the opposite of all three. In May 2002, Rumsfeld announced the cancellation. The stated reason was straightforward. The Crusader was too heavy to deploy rapidly. Its capabilities could reportedly be matched by upgraded versions of the existing Paladin, and the money was better spent elsewhere. The Army pushed back hard. Senior officers testified before Congress that the Crusader was critical to future warfighting capability. Several senators and representatives, particularly those from states with production contracts, fought the cancellation. United Defense, which had already invested years of work and contracts into the program, lobbied aggressively. None of it worked. What made the cancellation particularly striking was what happened next. Internal Pentagon documents later reported by defense journalists suggested that United Defense had been quietly lobbying Army officials and had even allegedly attempted to go around the civilian leadership to preserve the program. An internal investigation was launched. The episode exposed the uncomfortable reality of how deeply defense contractors can become embedded in the acquisition process. By the end of 2002, the Crusader was officially dead. The Army received some additional funding to accelerate improvements to the existing Paladin instead, a program that would eventually produce the M109A7, a significantly upgraded version that entered service years later. But here's the irony that nobody in the Pentagon talked about much at the time. While Rumsfeld was canceling the Crusader for being too heavy and too slow to deploy, the US was about to spend the next 2 decades fighting land wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Wars where heavy, sustained, long-range artillery fire would turn out to be extremely useful. The Crusader never fired a shot in combat. It never left the testing range. Its story is, in many ways, a Rorschach test for how you think about military procurement. If you believe Rumsfeld got it right, the Crusader was a Cold War relic, a 60-ton anachronism that had no place in the era of precision strikes and small footprint operations. The money saved was real. The weight problem was real. If you believe the Army got it right, the Crusader was canceled at exactly the wrong moment. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan saw sustained demands for artillery support. The M109 Paladin, the system the Crusader was designed to replace, ended up serving in both conflicts. The improvements that were supposed to make the Paladin good enough took years longer than expected. The M109A7 Paladin improved performance, which finally entered service in 2015, is genuinely impressive. But it still doesn't match what the Crusader was designed to do in terms of rate of fire or automation. And today the question is more relevant than ever. As the Army prepares for potential large-scale combat operations against peer adversaries, think Eastern Europe, think a hypothetical conflict with a major power, long-range precision artillery is back at the center of strategic planning. Programs like ERCA, the Extended Range Cannon Artillery, are trying to push American howitzers to ranges the Crusader never even targeted. Maybe Rumsfeld was right for 2003. Maybe the Army was right for 2023. The honest answer is that nobody fully knew what war was going to look like. And in that uncertainty, $14 billion was committed to a weapon that never had a chance to prove whether it was worth it. That's not a story unique to the Crusader. It's the story of American defense procurement told over and over again. If you made it this far, appreciate you. The Crusader is one of those programs that the more you dig into it, the more complicated it gets. And that's exactly the kind of story we're going to keep covering here. Next video, We're looking at another American weapons program that made it much further than the Crusader actually entered service, and still managed to become one of the most controversial procurement decisions in recent memory. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. Drop a comment with which canceled weapon you want covered next, and we'll see you in the next one.